You need a countdown? All right, we will call this special council meeting to order. Everybody stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, take the roll.
O'Connor.
Here.
Morissette. Here. DeZiel. Weber. Atkins Hoggett. Hall.
Here.
All right. I think everybody's here. We're all here. That's great. So I call this meeting, obviously, in response to what's going on out there, beginning with the state Supreme Court and then going down to the county guidelines that we just received prior to this meeting beginning. And I don't know if all of you have were copied on that or not. I just looked now. I think Bill probably sent it out to everybody. And we'll discuss that to some extent. I know Kathy has got it. So I know that this order from the Supreme Court has caught everybody by surprise, maybe not necessarily the fact that that they tossed out the order from the health department, but the fact that they did it without giving us any type of lead time whatsoever to try to come up with guidelines for our respective communities. So given that, we're all kind of trying to interpret, we're scrambling to see exactly how this impacts us and you know how we're going to proceed. Essentially, I wanted everybody, our council members, all together so that we can discuss this, have a singular idea, a singular message going out to our community. And I believe anyway, that we are going to have a very active weekend. And when I say that, I mean the council members. I expect that we're going to be getting a number of communications from our constituencies, people that might be confused, people that might not be happy with the outcome of the order that came down from the Supreme Court, and people that may want more businesses open than what have decided to open. So let me just say, I just want to start by saying this. We know that the virus is not going away. We know that just because we're able to open up, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to open up at the same time. Everybody the businesses probably intend to have different rules that they're going to put in place, and hopefully we'll have the guidelines here from the county that people will be respectful of. And that's the word that I want to use, is respect. I want to make sure that everybody in our community respects everyone else. For those people that want distance, we need to respect that. For those people that want to be wearing face masks, we want to respect that. For those people that don't, we hope that you would respect the wishes of people that want distance and proximity to their space. Respect is going to be the most important thing going forward. We must all understand that we have different opinions on this, and we must all try to respect each other's opinion and each other's space. I think that's primary, that's the most important thing. And so again, I wanted to call this meeting because I think this is going to be a weekend for all of us, and I just, as I said before, I think that it would be nice if we had a single voice going forward, and we all know exactly what the parameters are here that was sent down to us from the Supreme Court, as well as exactly what the guidelines from the county mean to us and to our businesses and our constituents throughout the city. So given that, we're going to obviously open this up to anybody that has questions, but I would like Kathy, first of all, our counsel here, city counsel, city attorney, to go through a little bit of the Supreme Court ruling, as well as then going into the guidelines that came down from the county, and then we'll open that up to questions for anybody and see if anybody has anything they'd like to say. For those people that were watching, there will be no action taken today at all. That's not the purpose of this meeting. This meeting is for information purposes only. And we're also not taking citizen comments for the same reason. Kathy?
Okay. Well, as you know, the Wisconsin Supreme Court decided that the emergency order number 28 was invalid and unenforceable on two grounds. One was procedure, and one was exceeding the authority under the statute that gives the Department of Health Services authority to issue orders relating to communicable diseases. The procedural grounds were that the court found that this was a rule of general application, and so they needed to go through the procedures required for adopting rules of general application or adopting emergency rules, neither of which they went through. And so they found it invalid in that respect. And they also found it invalid on constitutional grounds, that many of these restrictions were unconstitutional and thus exceeded the authority under the 252 statute that they were that was used to provide the authority. As you know, it was a 4-3 decision, 161 pages, one majority opinion, like 2 or 3 concurrences, and then dissents as well. So obviously there's a lot of different opinions on either both whether it's invalid and why. But the bottom line is it's invalid and unenforceable as of the date of the order, which was Wednesday, the 13th. Given that, the question comes up, I know it's come up, I've participated on several municipal attorney conference calls or Zoom meetings weekly with the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. The issue, and the last one was questions relating to opening up, just because this was a possibility and became a reality on Wednesday. So as a result, there's questions of whether cities and villages can have their own orders. I sent you an email. I don't know if you received it. It was at 2 o'clock today. The answer for cities and City of Hudson is yes, but it's questionable whether you can adopt restrictions similar to those in the Safer at Home Emergency Declaration number 28. It's just been found unconstitutional for those, and for that reason it's questionable, but it's also questionable because the statute that authorizes cities and towns and villages to issue these emergency orders is different and arguably narrower than the one that the health orders are issued under. So the best we can say at this point is it's unclear. I mean, with respect to health orders, the city doesn't have a municipal health department. The county does have has a county health department, so that the city is under any orders that the health officer for the county issues. We just got this St. Croix Health Advisory this afternoon. I haven't really looked at it carefully, but it says right up front, it's not an order, it's a guidance, and it looks like it adopts guidances very similar to those, or it recommends is really what it's doing, very similar to those recommended throughout this time period by both the federal governments and then as states open up, the state governments. You know, the standard washing hands, social distancing, you know, limiting, and again, it's just recommendations, limiting travel, stay home when you're sick, those kinds of things. It goes through the same lists of businesses. There is a best practice guidance that has been put together by the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, and they are recommending that businesses follow those recommendations. And I've looked at them online. They have different guidances for different industries and types of businesses. So that is encouraging that there has been thought put into by businesses and this Economic Development Corporation into what might be appropriate for different types of businesses. And the county guidance recommends that they look at that and follow that. It's same for faith communities that, well, and I'm not sure if they came up with these or, well, they have the 6-foot distancing, disinfecting, that type of thing, and additional, separating people, possibly changing some practices. So those are kind of where we are right now. We've got a recommendation from the county as to how people should operate their businesses and open up and so forth, and there are also some guidances from the Wisconsin Counties Association. They also found, and this is probably why St. Croix County issued just a recommendation type policy, they thought it was adoption of any restrictions that are similar to the ones in the Safer at Home declaration that was just declared invalid would be likely subject to challenge. I mean, the Wisconsin Supreme Court has just said those requirements, other than closing the schools for the rest of the term, those requirements and restrictions are invalid. So that's been the opinion of the Wisconsin Counties Association, at least at this time. It is possible, and I don't know, and that might be what's happening on this conference call, it is possible that the Department of Health, a discussion of it, that the Department of Health Services could go through a rulemaking process and adopt some type of restrictions. However, the ones that were in the Safer at Home were determined to be invalid both on procedural grounds and on constitutional grounds. So I think they would have to be different from what's in that Safer at Home emergency declaration. That, in a nutshell, I guess things are, uncertain right now, except that that's no longer in place. Number 28 is no longer in place.
Anybody have any questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a question on the guidelines, the state guidelines that WEDC is kind of the generator of. Did that include the rollout, the 4-phase rollout recommendations? I can't remember if it was there or someone else had read that.
To be honest, I don't know for certain. I think it was more targeted at just giving businesses, different types of businesses, suggestions on how to operate their businesses to be as safe as possible. I think those 4-stage rollout was more of a macro type thing for the state to track. Okay, what are our case numbers? What are our testing showing? If they can do antibody testing? They had various parameters that needed to be going down. What are the hospitals? How are they doing? I don't think the Economic Development Corporation covered that. I think they were.
No, that one did not do that, Jim. That one was more just kind of general rollout plans for when these businesses are ready to be open, how they should do it. It didn't talk about. Right. Yeah, it's a different plan. So, and I think, I'm trying to remember, I thought I maybe forwarded that out to the council last week, but I'll find that website again and forward it out so you can take a look at them. But it didn't include that sort of 4-step plan. It was more just, here's how you can do it and what things you can do to be safe and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I just couldn't remember where I read it. I almost believe it was in the preface to the plan or to their actual recommendations? That I'm not confident of that.
It could be the
What that did for
CDC.
me in looking at it was that at these phases of security, here's the level of safety you should be performing. So I think that was it's a graduated level of performance or of safety that has to be, should be considered. So I thought that's pretty key at some point. If we're going to roll this out, timing as to when we do different things. We can't expect to be 6 feet distance, maximum of 10 people wearing masks till the end of this thing. That's just not in the thought process of anything I've seen.
My comment is that I think,
Kathy, my question, this is Paul here, my question is on
you hearing me or what?
enforcement.
you're talking over me,
Advisory,
Paul.
So as I see it, there's no enforcement of the county guidelines, is that correct?
It's recommendations, let's see, and I apologize, I just got this at the last minute, but their recommendations, not
If you can't
something
hear-
that's
if you can't hear Kathy,
enforceable.
she's
I
saying
mean,
the
there's
recommendations
no,
only. They don't provide any statutory reference to say that these are enforceable.
no,
And just to point out, that's different than like Eau Claire County has done, that's different than Dane County has done. I don't so much see it as a constitutional issue because it seems to me under state law, the county health department can issue orders that are legal orders. So I'm curious as to why St. Croix is choosing not to enforce it and just make it an advisory. I guess we'd have to ask the county that though.
well, the Wisconsin Counties Association did put out, and I attached that to your email so you can look at it, it's from them, put out to their membership that adopting restrictions that are the same or similar, I don't have, well,
Is it this one?
basically the same as, that's the league, are likely to be found invalid because the Wisconsin Supreme Court just found those restrictions to be invalid. And the local public health departments work as agents of the state health department. They derive their authority from them. So that's the connection. Now, I'm just guessing that may have figured into the county's thinking on why adopting recommendations versus actual restrictions.
Right, and I want to be clear, I think the county advisory recommendations are very solidly thought out and developed well and make sense for public safety and with businesses opening. So I have no difficulty with the recommendations. If people were to follow them, I think that's good for long-term recovery. But I guess my question is still, if there's no enforcement, what other than respect and sort of, being a strong community can we use to encourage people to follow those guidelines?
Well,
I
as
don't
a
know if anybody can
practical
answer that, Paul.
matter,
I think that issue is that everybody knows these
Why are we
guidelines. I
getting
mean, I think we've all known these same guidelines for the past month and a half or so. So it's because these are guidelines and not requirements. I think it does kind of come down to at this point. Hopefully, businesses are doing the right thing. Hopefully, people are doing the right thing. But all we can do is help promote it, and that's about all. And I think from what I've seen, just like on the various like Facebook pages for our local businesses, I think 99% of them are basically following these guidelines. They've talked about, we see that it's open, but we're still only doing curbside right now until we can work out our plan to make sure everybody stays, you know what I mean? I think most of our businesses are, but as with anything, you will find some that won't. But at that point, there's not much we can do with that, really, as far as an enforcement side.
and
Yeah, I agree, but my other question then, so that makes sense to me, Aaron. The other question is, as we open businesses, right, if people don't follow the guidelines, we are going to get more spread of infection and numbers, will go up, because this is a longer term issue we're talking about, I think. So my question is then for Kathy, maybe, legally speaking, at what point, if hospitals were to say be overrun with capacities, at what point could counties or states or cities or anybody put some enforcement on this? I'm kind of playing out worst case scenario. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but at what point, who intervenes to say there has to be a bottom line here?
Well, I mean, there isn't anything to keep the state health department from adopting other restrictions that may not be as, well, that the court might find constitutional. They haven't lost their authority to adopt orders under their emergency order authority, but they just, this order, the court found unconstitutional. So they still can issue orders as long as they try to stay within the bounds at least identified in that decision. The same is true of the county. There's nothing that's stopping them from adopting orders. They just have to be mindful of the issues raised with the restrictions that were in the number 28. Also, just as a practical matter, given that there's all these best practices and recommendations in place, like the counties and the Economic Development Corporation, there's the question of liability for businesses is very real, as it is for all people. And we have a list of best practices, and so I think they will have a self-interest here to try to comply with those as much as they can to avoid any liability issues. So, I mean, that's just something on their end that they will need to check with their own insurance companies and so forth.
I'd like to make a comment. Can you hear me on TV land? This is Randy.
Can you guys hear Randy?
No.
You can hear me.
Have to yell. Did they hear me?
Yell. Let's talk louder.
Can you hear me now?
No.
This one? No? Hello?
Very broken.
How about this one? Bill, thank you. I just think, my opinion is that the county put out a guideline, and as a businessman, I am following the guidelines that are laid out. Paul, we can't rule in fear, and I'm not suggesting that you meant that, but at the same time, we have to allow our, I guess, faith in our business community to make the right decisions out there based on what is constitutionally their right under Amendment 14 of the Constitution. So I really think that this is a well-balanced. I was worried there for a minute because I think, as I heard earlier today, once you take the toothpaste out of the tube, it's kind of hard to put it back in. And I would hate to see us try to go back. I think that the faith in our business community and following these guidelines and letting them do what they have to do to meet those requirements, I think is a good policy. So I do not support restrictions, as I think, Paul, you might be suggesting. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But let's have some faith in the business community to make the right decision based on the guidelines given to us.
Well, we know some of them, we can't have faith in them because they're already violating the guidelines like crazy. So that concerns me that others will see, oh my gosh, I'm losing out. Now I got to jump in.
I think that's false, and you need to know the facts before you start pointing fingers. I know exactly what situation you're talking about, Jim.
What?
I know exactly the situation you were talking about.
You want me to name names? I won't do that because I don't want to advertise for them, for the people who are inclined to take risk. People going to these places increase my risk.
It's personal responsibility.
Encourage the spread of the problem, so I'm not supportive of it. I think that we should be adhering to these guidelines until we're pretty confident about what's going to happen. Rates still going up in Minnesota. We're just a microcosm of them. So it's...
Well, just a reminder, we are doing more testing, so the rates will go up.
These places, we don't want people to jump off the cliff. We want them to, the whole plan has been re-enter gradually. That's the national guidelines, is to re-enter gradually.
Is his mic working yet?
Yes, no?
So I think, Jim, that I don't think anybody disagrees with that part. It's just that I think, like what Catherine said, is that we don't really have the ability to do any sort of enforceable requirements. That has to come really from the state or county level at this point. And because we don't have that, all we can do is promote the guidelines and the use of the guidelines, and hope that our business is doing. And like I mentioned, from what I've seen so far, it seems that like a vast majority of them are following them. But as far as anything more than that, right now there's really nothing we can do other than try to promote. These are the guidelines, and here's what we're hoping everyone's following, and the WEDC guidelines for reopening and those sort of things. But beyond that, we don't have the authority to do much else.
We also need to be cognizant of the facts and not going off of social media and conjecture.
We can't hear you, Randy, sorry.
Yeah.
We also can't go off of rumors. We have to go off of facts, not off of social media and conjecture.
Sarah, I think you're muted.
Guess I should have stayed home. It would have been better.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Randy, I'm sorry, I could make out the beginning of what you said and not the end. So same thing with what Catherine's saying and same thing what Rich is saying. So if we're going to have another meeting where there's some of you there and some of us on Zoom, we're going to have to figure out the technology so that those of us here can hear it. The people in that room, it's very, very taxing to try to hear you and understand what you're saying and then formulate a response. So I just want to state that it's a struggle for me to hear. I just looked up prior to this is just some facts, prior to our meeting, I looked up number of cases in Washington, Ramsey, Hennepin, and Dakota counties, right across the river, and then as well things that were spoken done. So in the 4 counties over there, our neighbors, 2,764 cases with 313 deaths, and in our 4-county area, we have 78 cases and 0 deaths. I understand that we are part of a state and we are also part of a county, but we need to be on the leading edge of the Minnesota side. And we depend on those hospitals in Minneapolis-St. Paul. If we have cases here that need ICU, that's where we need to be able to access those hospitals. And with the numbers that they have, I heard on the radio this morning that Bethesda Hospital, which was meant to handle most of the cases from Minnesota, they're filling up. They're on the verge of full. Won't be able to take anymore. So, while I truly appreciate that businesses are able to make decisions and be smart, and many of them are, as Jim pointed out, they're putting the rest of us at risk too. I really loved the quote from Bill about, you can swing your arms, you're free to swing your arms, but the minute they touch somebody else's nose, well, that's kind of touching our own, somebody else's nose now, I understand that promotion of the guidelines are, is really all we can do. But boy, I want us to get out there and promoting it as loud as we can. I mean, this, you know, it's not a joke. It's very serious. And the people that are going to be rushing in from across the river, their rate of the cases, rate of death, and the filling up of the hospitals today, you know, it was Trump's own guidelines that said that we need to see a downside decline of 14 days before we, you know, really start gradually opening up. And now we are on an upswing, and we didn't gradually open; we just blew the doors wide open. So that's how I feel about it. If our hands are tied to promotion only, well, we better go shout it from the mountaintop.
Anybody else?
I agree with all that's been said about making sure that we do everything that in our power that we can, and our hands are tied. But my questions are, I know that the city is following the guidelines as best as possible, but this reopening could affect our police department in particular, as far as putting them at risk. Aaron, do you have, can you address that? And are there any recommendations or suggestions to make sure that they are able to remain safe? The other thing that I wanted to just be on the record of is that, you know, we've got a lot of vulnerable residents, particularly the elderly in all of our senior living facilities, and because we have so many senior living facilities, I hope that all of them are going to continue to follow the guidelines, but hope that we can at some point do something to make sure that everyone is kept safe.
Yeah, so I think as far as our police go, I mean, we're going to be following the exact same procedures they've been following with their, you know, interactions with the public. You know, I think the risk would come is if you see where they have to, you know, have response calls to a business that maybe isn't following the guidelines and is full of people and things like that. But, you know, with that, we have more than an adequate amount of protective equipment for them. So the masks, the gloves, the glasses, all those sort of things. So, you know, it's one of those things where all we can do is give them the equipment necessary for the protection. And if they have to go in, they'll be wearing it, and that's what we can do. But I think as far as any larger risk than what we're seeing right now, I don't know that there will be. It just depends on if you get a situation where they're going into, you know, maybe a larger group where there's potential for more exposure. But, you know, I just don't know for sure that's going to occur or not. But like I said, if it does, we do have the equipment available, and they'll be wearing it. That, you know, as with any situation that they're going to respond to right now, they'll be as safe as possible. But there's just no guarantees if it's one person or 50 people. But they'll have the equipment at least to be as safe as possible.
Kathy, can you comment, please, on contact tracing and what kind of responsibilities there are for contact tracing? I know that the state has been doing some of it. Is there anything that we could do to assist with that? So, for example, somebody posted to social media that, you know, we should require bars and restaurants to have all guests sign in with the time that they arrive, so that if somebody becomes sick, we can warn them.
Yeah, I don't know that the city has the authority to do that, to require that of businesses. I don't have much information on the contact tracing issue, but I can certainly look into it. And I know the league we've been having these calls every week.
Saying, Kathy, sorry.
Pardon? I'll keep it short then. I'll look into it. I don't think we can require the businesses to get everybody's name and address. I don't think that's a requirement we can make, but I can look into further who is or what is the theory on contact tracing and how's that being done, if it's being done. Okay? I don't think they heard me. Did you hear me?
Aaron, can you repeat what she said, please?
I'm not there. I can't. It's got to be somebody else.
Yeah, I'm
I
sorry.
thought you were there. Okay.
I don't believe the city can require private businesses or even private individuals to give their names to private businesses. I haven't looked into it. I will look into it, and I don't really have any information on contact tracing, but I will look into it.
Everybody hear that?
No.
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 I heard that Kathy is going to look into it.
Yes, yep.
What she's saying is that she has no information on that right now, but she will look into it. You guys hear me? Jesus Christ.
But I'm sorry to interrupt. Could it be possible you all could call in on the number, the Zoom phone number, and just talk on your phone, and even being on camera there?
How's that?
That's
Can you
what
hear
I'm
us
doing. I'm on
now?
my phone, but I'm seeing the Zoom meeting.
Can you hear
Maybe
it?
I can hear you a whole lot better. I think it would put less stress on this conversation.
Sarah, Brian's trying to work on this to make it better. Can you hear me? Apparently not.
Can you move closer to your microphone, please?
Brian, here's a thought, Brian. Just from a technology standpoint, every once in a while we're hearing deep breaths. And I'm wondering if you have a different mic on for Mike Johnson, and it's somebody else's mic, and so that's why it's quiet. It's a possibility.
Can you hear me, Bill?
I do want to say a couple of things to a couple of your points. You know, part of this meeting that we have with the large group on Mondays, I can give you a little bit of insight that our county is actively doing contact tracing with those who are come back positive with COVID. And so that is currently happening from county standpoint. My last communication with Brad Beckman at ADRC, which is the county, the Department of Aging, I did ask him about nursing homes and senior care facilities, and at that point everything was closed. There's no plan to open wide up. I can certainly ask that question again. I think all of us are feeling that we as a city don't want to have to close because of the number of cases that we have.
You can just go
And
one in his
so we're
office,
talking
one in the
about
back in the executive
I
with
would just
Ryan
say-
Carey.
I would just say this, I know for my family, we're
just
making a
one.
choice in part because my wife works in healthcare, to stay close at home. And I would say to those that are considering staying close at home and making that choice, you have the absolute right to make that choice. And there are support mechanisms that we have out there as a community. Again, you know, as we work through this process, you know, I think for the betterment of our community, I mean, if everybody can sort of just follow these guidelines, and we can all get through this as a community, I think, you know, the other side of this looks great.
I think we need to reach out to our businesses and ask them to consider adhering to the guidelines that the county has published. And I'm not sure the best way to do this, certainly you can't go through the business councils. You need to get some information out there.
Chamber.
Advise, we need to do something active. We can't just let this roll and trust that somebody's going to do the right thing. We say, here's what the right thing is. And then they choose from that.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah, I agree with that, Jim. All right, so a week ago, the state came into the county and did a lot of drive-through testing. Have those numbers come back yet?
Drive-through testing has come through. There were, Rich, I think you, Mayor, I think you were in that meeting I believe 1 positive case came out of River Falls and 4 came out of Baldwin. So a total of 5. Now there were a little over, oh gosh, I don't remember the numbers. It was
200 some.
250.
over 400
Whoa.
that were tested, something like that.
Wow. Is that right, Mike?
On the St. Croix County, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm just looking at St. Croix County health website. So we've got 37 cases confirmed and 23 probable. So that's a total of 60 in the last 2 months in St. Croix County.
Correct. And within, all I was saying was within those numbers, those came out of, 5 came out of drive-through testing. I do know that they are, I think a big thing
Why can the county do this
is
and we can't?
these guidelines come into play from public health. I want a reminder to everybody here, this is not public health washing their hands of all this, right? I mean, they are still keeping very close tabs, and they're, I know Kelly from the public health standpoint, Lori, both at the department level, they're working 7 days a week on this. And this, that the guidelines are coming out is not public health not being a part of this going forward. Does that make sense? Yeah, so I wouldn't look at the guidelines. From my perspective, I wouldn't look at us in our stance.
Back it up.
Having to respond from a public health
You can turn it up, just back it up.
is still there.
Do what?
Right?
You can turn that up, just keep it away from the computer, I think. Who was the question to, Bill?
There was no question. I was just making a statement that through this, the guidelines set forth by public health is not public health not being a part of this. Public health is very much involved through the course of this. We can't lose sight that they are still doing their job and they're still following, and it looks like we lost City Hall.
We lost video.
Lost video. Who was that? Mayor?
It was Brian.
Yeah.
It was Brian.
Can you see us now?
Yes.
Okay, Brian had the computer turned around.
You?
Pardon me?
That's you, Mr. Mayor, right?
That's me what?
Talking.
Yes, it is, I'm sorry, yep.
Excellent.
We can hear you much better now.
Much better.
Well,
We can see you, but
Brian, well, that's not all bad, Jim. You wouldn't recognize me with my shaggy hair anyway. Yeah, Brian put us on a phone, and the phone is right in front of me, so it's going to be easy to hear me, but we'll try to move it around here with Kathy and Randy too. All right, so Bill, back to you. What were you asking or saying?
No, I was just saying, just as a reminder to everybody that the guidelines coming out and not an order coming out does not tell us that public health is doing less of a job. Public health is still on all of this. They're still working and keeping tabs on everything. And I know in my conversations with Kelly, she's keeping very close tabs on everything that's happening. So I know that we as a group may be feeling anxious about this, but we can't lose sight of the fact that public health is still there as our department and keeping very close tabs on everything. And we'll take action if needed. That's all I was saying, Mr. Mayor.
All right, so I'm hearing from a number of our council members that they think that the city needs to somehow get the message out about the guidance that came down from the county and to the folks in the city as well as the businesses. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, here's the hard part. Anybody have any ideas on how to do that?
Well, I think the website for the city is a huge resource that we can use. I think the Facebook.
It's already out there.
We can put stuff out on
The
Facebook.
health.
It's already out there on the city website.
What? Did you post on Facebook yet? No. Oh, no, not yet.
I wonder if it's something that.
Oh, it will be. I'm sorry. The most recent guideline is not there yet. I think CDC guidelines are out there though.
What we have,
which is pretty consistent.
he's got it, we got it right before the meeting, so we're setting it
Yeah,
up.
so anyway, yes, that is a medium that we'll be using, and have been using.
Do a link to
And
the,
then what I was going to suggest
Economic
is
development.
Chamber of Commerce too, working, folks probably are already aware of them, but I think it's worth working with the chamber also to get the guidelines for business reopenings out there.
Again,
Make a suggestion, but
go ahead, Sarah.
I would make a suggestion that kind of goes on the back of that Chamber of Commerce idea. Perhaps they could come up with a flyer or something in their window of the small retail and the restaurants and whatever that says, we're following state and national guidelines or whatever guidelines we want to reference, but if there was something that they could use to promote themselves that they are following it at that store, it might be kind of a marketing thing for them as well. Could be a positive thing.
I have a quick answer, if I may. So as part of this group that we are doing on Mondays, you know, the multifaceted, multi-sectors, we have a communications group that's a subset of that. Mary Claire from the Chamber is part of that. A number of leaders are in that. A couple of the members are creating posters to do just that. We are not quite there yet because it's a moving target insofar as we just got the information from the county in terms of guidelines. And so working on verbiage through that, we are looking at a timeline of early next week for those to be made available. So it is being worked on. And I know that you don't necessarily have sight to that, so I just want to confirm that.
6:30 for finance.
Mr. Mayor, can we ask Mary Claire just to unmute and see if she has some ideas on that as well?
Absolutely.
Mary Claire, are you there?
Brian, are you in charge of this? Okay, she should be unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
But no one will let you see me. Okay. So we have been communicating with the members throughout the past 9 weeks. Every day we are updating our COVID-19 resources with all of the guidelines from CDC and the Wisconsin Economic Group on how the 13 different types of businesses can open. And yes, Councilmember Tietze, we are working on that communications poster that we're hoping to get out today, but we will get that out early next week, along with doing another communication to all of the members about the guidance from St. Croix County that is also on our website too. So agree that this is a very serious issue. The concern I have is what has happened the past few days and how that's being perceived in the media and what's going to happen this weekend. So there are restaurants and businesses concerned that if somebody does not follow the rules, that they all could potentially get shut down. So we're looking for clarity on that. But yes, we are communicating and more to follow either this weekend or Monday morning.
I don't think so.
Thank you.
It would have to be staged.
So a couple of other points beyond that, and if anybody has any ideas in terms of communication, I know Mayor and I have spoken about this a lot too, is how do we best communicate? We don't have a good or great local news source in how to get that information
Whether they
out.
could all get shut down.
A couple of things that I brought up to the county, or that was brought to the county through this committee, not just me, was number one, would they be able to do robocalls? So just kind of reaching out to the whole mass through phone calls and messages. So they're investigating that. The other question that I had for them was any kind of electronic signage through transportation, you know, those little detour signs that are put up every once in a while. So they're looking at that as well. So, but if you have any other ideas for that, by all means, you know, as much as we can get the information out there, the better.
Kathy wants to address Mary Claire's last statement here.
Yeah, it was the concern that if there's a few quote-unquote bad actors, that all the businesses could get shut down. That was one of the restrictions that the court, that was in that number 28 emergency declaration, and the court found unconstitutional. So I think that's unlikely. Pardon?
No, go ahead.
I think that the court has already addressed that in terms of the authority of the state health department to close down the businesses or order them to not be open, and found it was invalid. They heard me.
All right, so I guess we're looking at ways to communicate. Obviously, any ideas people have, you've got, a little bit of time to try to figure out ways to communicate this. This will be, I think everybody understands it's going to be a long weekend. If anybody has any ideas that they want to bring forward to the council for action on Monday, we need to know this quickly for notice purposes. Everybody hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Are there any other comments, suggestions?
I just have a thought about future council meetings, Mr. Mayor. So what I'm wondering, so I talked to the superintendent, Dr. Ouellette from the school district, and he just said that if any time city council wants to meet in the high school auditorium or a bigger venue where we could socially distance and people could come and also socially distance, that he's open to that. So I'm not suggesting that for the meeting on Monday, understand me, but I just think it's worth thinking about, because that might be a much better venue to return to than to City Hall, which I just think is going to be small, and if you get a crowd, it's just going to be hard to maneuver. So I would suggest we think about that as a strategy for eventually getting back together to meet live.
All right, so noted. I don't know that we'd have to talk with Nate and see what the capability is of doing something from a different venue.
Right, and Dr. Ouellette said that they've done school board meetings that way, so he was thinking that Cable is sort of familiar with the setup, but I don't know what that involves. So.
Sure. So one thing then that I would ask you guys to consider is, I wanted to do this meeting here in person for anybody that wanted to be here, and obviously the vast majority of the people did not want to be in person, and that's fine. But I think it sends a signal also to people that we are trying to return to somewhat normal activity here, but also being mindful of the recommendations that have come down from the CDC and now from the county. I'm hoping that we can social distance here. I can tell you this, Paul, that in my opinion anyway, and this would also go to the auditorium, but I think in-person meetings, especially when we come down to the point where we're having public hearings, and we've got a couple of them coming up that are going to be pretty important, and many of the people that want to participate in those public hearings cannot get onto Zoom, don't have the technology, the wherewithal to be able to do that. And we need to somehow get back into some type of normalcy, at least for government, so that our constituents have access to us. And I think that's the most important piece. So I certainly understand and respect everybody's decision not to be here today. I suspect that will happen on Monday as well. Hopefully by Monday we'll have the technology back in working order. It's my understanding a piece of equipment went down today. That was critical to communication between all of us. So my question then to you, Paul, and to anybody else is, at what point do you think it would be appropriate to be able to get back into a normal mode here to have meetings in our council chambers? What needs to happen first?
Well, I wouldn't suggest going back to the council chambers as the initial response. That's why I think the high school is a much better idea, being spread out. For the open hearings or whatnot, people can spread out, so we're not worried about the space. I just think the council chambers are going to be too small.
Again, my question then is, at what point, what has to happen before you would feel comfortable that we're all back together again in the council chambers?
I think it has to do, the virus is going to determine that for us. The rates of infection are going to determine that for us. The vaccine is going to determine that for us. So a lot of that's out of our control, I think. The physical space, I just think, is too small. So I think the better thing is let's get the alternative site set up where we can manage in live person. And then let's let the virus play out. We don't know where we're talking 6 months. We don't know where we're talking a year. This could be a long-term thing. We just don't know at this point.
I have a question, if I may, Paul. Are you talking about council members in that room, or are you talking about having public being able to attend?
Yeah, I think the public, I think if we gather together as a council in a live format, I would like the public to be able to access that. So that's why I'm suggesting a bigger space would be the best way to transition back.
Thank you.
All right, it's something we can explore.
I think today's technology hiccup was solved very simply by having you folks call in on the Zoom telephone number rather than using, you were all trying to yell at the laptop, which was across the table. It did not work. So having a connection by telephone, you can each even be on your phone, so there wouldn't be any problems at all.
In fact, sir, we tried that once before, and with everybody, we had people on iPads here for a small meeting, and I think there were 3 or 4 of us in here that were all calling in individually to Zoom, and it does not work. Period. There's echo and feedback coming from each one of those iPads or phones, and it creates, everybody had to leave the room, in fact, they all went into separate rooms in order to make it work. So we tried it, doesn't work. It's working right now because we're only using one phone. And
oh, when you tried it that last time, was everyone on speaker, or were they holding their phone like that?
no, we had iPads. Somebody may have had a phone, I'm not sure, but a number of us had iPads.
So, well, by telephone it seemed to work out.
Well, we're gonna, this works at the county. There are a number of municipalities that are doing in-person meetings right now. New Richmond just had one yesterday, and the county itself is meeting in their chambers. Some people are calling in, some are using Zoom to access the meeting, and others are there. It's about 50-50. About half the county superintendents are actually in the room. And it's been working fine for them. We just need to get this up and running somehow to make sure it works here or at the school district or someplace else. But we need to get this technology working, and I'm getting nods here. It will be working by Monday. I'm getting affirmation of that. So it's going to be a long weekend for everybody. Brian says no. He's got it covered. All right.
Mr. Mayor, a couple of comments I'd like to make before we leave. But I had down to drove down to Rochester today and back, and it was really starting to get disgusting to hear them talking about Wisconsin bars being open and the kind of parties that were going on, and people feel free to leave Wisconsin to come to Minnesota because it'll be quieter. And in addition, I had to stop at a couple places, and they're all wearing masks voluntarily. They require, the businesses are requiring people to wear masks to come in. A garden shop, a feed shop, these are not critical businesses, but they're all independents. So they're taking very good care.
Right.
And I just think we need to, I'm embarrassed, let's put it that way.
Okay.
And I have seen the Facebook comments. I know there are a lot of our businesses are taking the right approach, making it safe for their employees and the customers.
Well, and I know Menards. I think they were the first store that I saw in town that required the masks. And of course, they got beat up a little bit on social media, and that again goes back to my original comment that we need to all respect everyone and their wishes, and how, especially the businesses, they have the authority. They do have the authority to require people to adhere to these guidelines. So we need, the people out there that are accessing these businesses need to respect the wishes of the business owners, and people on the street need to respect one another and how they all respond to what's going on out there right now. One thing I kind of truncated my opening remarks, and I wanted to say that, and I know that you've heard this before, but as we do reopen, and this is going to happen anywhere, and it really doesn't matter if it's a soft transition or just the wide open like we have right now, we are going to experience an uptick in cases. There's no doubt about it. As people are exposed to one another again, there's no way that we can prevent that from happening. And again, that really doesn't matter if it's a phased-in transition or if it's just wide open. It's just a matter of how fast and how hard it hits. So we are going to experience that. We know that. But again, we're going to try to keep this to a minimum. A couple of you have already referenced how well our counties, ours and the surrounding 3 counties, have done so far with respect to the number of cases that we've seen that have been positive, and the fact, fortunately, that we have not had any deaths due to the virus. So we want to try to keep that on track, knowing, of course, that we still will have experienced an increase. And then when we come into the fall, there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to have that second, or what I would call probably third wave, because I think the second wave is going to hit as we all start opening up again. And so we're going to get hit at least once, twice more before anything else happens relative to a vaccine or relative to herd immunity. And we need to understand that. So. But in the meantime, I get back to, we just need to respect everybody and go from there. So again, if Joyce, did you have something to say?
Yeah.
Or Sarah?
Yeah, I did. One of the articles that I read suggested that tying the use of masks to improving the economy would be useful. I'm not sure how we would go about doing that, but it's true. I mean, the more people that we can get using masks, then the better things are going to go. We're going to prevent a lot of illness that way, which will help with managing and keeping businesses open. So if we can get that message across to people, I think that is a smart way of getting people to use masks.
Okay. I saw an article, I read an article from the New York Times late last week, early this week. The title of it, and I'll send a link out to everybody. The title of it was How Pandemics End. And I found it to be a very interesting read, and they say that they end medically and they end socially, and the majority of the pandemics that we've had, let's say most recent, and obviously the last one was a century ago, really, but have ended socially. And then they go into how that all happens and why. But I think it's a really good read, and I'll get that link out to everybody. And obviously the more we read, the more we absorb as far as information, the better off we're all going to be. So,
Mr. Mayor, can you tell, when you say end socially, can you give me like a little more meat on that?
Well, so for example, the 1918 flu, there was no vaccine. To this day, there is no vaccine for the 1918 flu. In fact, back then, they didn't even know what a virus was. They didn't know how to detect it. So it ended socially. It ended with, they had a couple waves, and the second wave hit when the troops came back from World War I and brought a lot of it. First of all, they brought it. It did not originate in Spain. It originated here in the United States. We brought it over there with our troops, and our troops brought it back here again in a big way. But through herd immunity, it ended, and it took about a year and a half. First wave, and then the second wave being bigger, but then it just kind of dissipated, went away. In the meantime, it left a huge wake. A lot of people died, obviously. But it ended here, I think, before it ended elsewhere throughout the world, continued in a big way throughout the world. But anyway, that was just one example that they gave. So it's, I'll get the link out to everybody, and it's a good read. Anybody else?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to respond to the earlier statement that you made just a minute ago. That was probably in a wrap-up kind of a statement. You talked about how you didn't feel it was different, and we're going to go through what we're going to go, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of said we're going to go through what we're going to go through, whether or not we do it fast or slow.
Well, that's not, it's kind of, what I said is that no matter how we transition, and it doesn't matter if we continue with the lockdown for another 2 or 3 months, it doesn't matter if we have a phased opening, it doesn't matter if we have just opened the doors, we are going to experience an uptick in positive cases, no matter what. We know, I think we can all agree that with just the doors being thrown wide open, it's likely that that uptick is going to be a lot greater and a lot quicker. And especially given that, you know, we do see in Minnesota, this thing is really starting to take off in Washington and Ramsey counties, and they're closest to us on the border, and if they come across the border, we're likely to be infected from people coming across from Minnesota. But be that as it may, back to my statement, it doesn't matter how we do this, we will experience an uptick, and it's just a matter of how dramatic, based upon how, you know, I think back to what I said, with the doors being thrown wide open, I think the uptick is going to be faster, greater than if it was gradual, but even if it was gradual, we would still experience an uptick.
And I agree with that. I think that people need to remember and be very mindful of the capacities of our hospital.
We lost you, Sarah. Brian, is that her or us? Oh. We
can't hear you, Sarah.
All right, move to adjourn.
Sarah, she must have stopped talking, because I think we would have still see her up there, but.
It says you're unmuted, Sarah, so I don't know if it must be a technology piece.
It's like your phone. Yeah, I'm done.
I'll move to adjourn.
All right, we have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to adjourn. Discussion? No, I guess not. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Good luck, everybody. Stay safe out there. And like I said, if you do have any type of anything you want on the agenda, get it to us quick relative to this. That's it. Because we've got notice that it has to be taken care of. All right, everybody have a good weekend. Stay in touch.